In 1913, one of the greatest minds in the history of psychology had a complete breakdown. He began seeing visions, rivers of blood, floods consuming Europe, a sun rising from the underworld, a blind woman, a prophet, a serpent coiled around his body. He was terrified. He genuinely believed he was going insane. But instead of running from it, instead of burying it, medicating it, pretending it wasn't happening, Carl Jung did something almost no one in human history had done before. He went deeper. He sat down at his desk every day and descended deliberately into the darkest chambers of his own mind. And he wrote down everything he found there, in careful calligraphy in German, Latin, and Greek, and he painted it in images so vivid and strange they look like they belong in a medieval cathedral. The result was a book unlike anything ever written. He called it Liber Novus, the New Book. The world would come to know it simply as the Red Book, and then he locked it in a vault for nearly 100 years, because he was afraid of what people would think. Today, we're going to open it. Before we go into the Red Book itself, you need to understand who Jung was and what he had just been through when he started writing it. Carl Gustav Jung was a Swiss psychiatrist in the early 1900s. He didn't just contribute to psychology, he remapped it. Think about the words you use every day without thinking about where they came from. Introvert, extrovert. Those are Jung's words. The idea that you have a hidden self, a dark side of your personality that you suppress and project onto others. That's Jung's shadow. The theory that beneath your personal psychology lies a deeper layer of symbols and patterns shared by all of humanity, the collective unconscious. That's Jung too. Those personality tests everyone loves to take online, the ones that give you a 4-letter code and tell you you're the architect or the visionary, rooted in Jung's work. The man shaped the way the modern world understands the human mind, but in 1913, he wasn't that yet. In 1913, he was a brilliant psychiatrist in free fall. For years, Jung had been considered the heir apparent to Sigmund Freud, the most powerful figure in psychology at the time. Freud had essentially hand-picked Jung as his successor, the one who would carry his theories into the future. But Jung couldn't stay silent about what he disagreed with. He thought Freud was too obsessed with sexuality as the root of all human suffering. He thought Freud's concept of the unconscious was too shallow, that it barely scratched the surface of how deep the psyche actually went. And most unforgivably, in Jung's eyes, Freud had no patience for the spiritual dimension of human experience, for myth, for symbol, for the ancient stories that every civilization on Earth had always used to make sense of what it means to be alive. Jung published a book that made his disagreements public, and Freud never spoke to him again. In the aftermath, Jung's entire social world collapsed. Colleagues who had respected him now dismissed him. Friends disappeared. He was labeled a mystic, said with contempt, as though mysticism was a disease. He had built his identity around being a scientist, a clinician, a serious intellectual, and now all of that was gone. He was, as he put it, in a liminal state, a place between worlds, no longer who he had been, not yet who he would become. And that's when the visions started. It began in October 1913. Jung was alone on a train journey when he was suddenly seized, his own word, seized, by an overwhelming vision. He saw a monstrous flood covering all the low-lying lands of Europe, from the North Sea to the Alps. Yellow waves, the floating rubble of civilization, thousands of drowned bodies, and then the sea turned to blood. The vision lasted an hour. He sat there, shaking, nauseated, convinced he was mentally ill. 2 weeks later it came back. More vivid, more blood. An inner voice said, "Look at it well. It is wholly real, and it will be so. You cannot doubt it." He assumed the visions were about himself, some psychological eruption, some symptom of the breakdown he was living through. Then, in the spring of 1914, a new vision arrived, 3 times. An Arctic cold wave descending in the middle of summer, the whole of Europe frozen, every living thing killed by frost. On August 1st, 1914, World War I began. Jung later wrote that when he heard the news, something shifted in him. These weren't symptoms. The visions weren't about him alone. They were about something larger, something stirring in the collective unconscious of an entire civilization, something that had tried to surface through his mind before it surfaced in history. And he said, "My first obligation was to probe the depths of my own psyche. This is where the Red Book begins." Jung devised a method, simple on the surface, terrifying in practice. He would enter a meditative state. He practiced yoga and was skilled at altering his breathing and calming his nervous system. And then he would engage a fantasy, a specific one. He imagined he was digging a hole, deeper and deeper, down through the earth, down through layers of darkness, until he reached a place where the ordinary mind could no longer follow. And then he would stop and wait and see what came. He described it like this: "I devised such a boring method by fantasizing that I was digging a hole, and by accepting this fantasy as perfectly real, that fantasy had to produce and lure out other fantasies." This practice, which he would later name active imagination, is now considered one of the foundational tools of Jungian psychoanalysis. But when Jung was doing it in 1913, he had no name for it. He had no map. He was venturing into unmapped territory with no guarantee he'd find his way back. And on the night of December 12th, 1913, he went somewhere that changed him permanently. The vision he recorded that night is titled simply "Descent into Hell in the Future." He finds himself in a dark cave, black water, an oppressive roaring of 1,000 voices. He wades through the water and finds a luminous red crystal, six-sided cold light radiating from within. He lifts it and sees beneath it a dark hole. He puts his ear to it. He hears underground water flowing, and then he sees a severed human head floating on the dark stream. Then a black scarab, the ancient Egyptian symbol of transformation and rebirth. Then, at the deepest point of the stream, a sun, a red sun shining from beneath the water, surrounded by 1,000 serpents, and then blood, a red stream of blood, surging and ebbing. He wrote afterward, "What did I see?" What makes the Red Book unlike anything else in the history of psychology is not just what Jung experienced. It's how he chose to record it. He didn't write clinical notes. He didn't use academic language. He wrote in the style of an ancient religious manuscript, careful calligraphy by hand, the text flowing across thick parchment pages in German, Latin, and Greek. And throughout, he painted. Full-page illuminations, mandalas, serpents, prophets, visions of fire and flood and crucifixion, images of breathtaking beauty and disturbing strangeness. If you were to pick up the Red Book without knowing what it was, you would guess it was 1,000 years old. Some artifact of medieval mysticism, a lost gospel. It is 205 pages of the inner world of one of the greatest minds of the 20th century, laid completely bare. Written, he said, not to be published, not to prove a theory, but simply to understand what was happening to him. He worked on it between 1913 and around 1930, and then he stopped. He said he had learned what he needed to learn, and he locked it away. When Jung died in 1961, his family found the vault, and they kept it locked. For decades, the Red Book existed mostly as a rumor, mentioned occasionally in lectures, referred to obliquely in interviews. Scholars and analysts were sometimes permitted to view it under strict conditions. The legend grew. The contents must be so extreme, so bizarre, so unlike anything Jung had publicly stood for, that releasing it would destroy his reputation. In 2009, nearly 50 years after his death, it was finally published. And what people found was not a madman's ranting. What they found was a masterpiece. Throughout the Red Book, Jung doesn't journey alone. He encounters figures, mythic, archetypal figures, and he talks to them, argues with them, pleads with them, is terrified by them, The two most significant are Elijah and Salome. Elijah, the ancient Hebrew prophet, a man of spiritual fire associated with miracles, with divine knowledge, with the direct voice of God. Salome, a very different kind of figure. She is the woman from the New Testament who danced before King Herod and, at her mother's request, demanded the head of John the Baptist on a platter. In the centuries after, she became a symbol in Western art and literature of dangerous desire, of beauty that corrupts and destroys. In Jung's vision, he descends into an underground hall with glittering walls and finds them together. An old prophet, wise, calm, clear-eyed, standing beside a beautiful young woman who is completely blind. And Elijah says something that stops Jung cold. "I and my daughter have been one since eternity." Jung is horrified. How can a holy prophet be bound to a woman like this? How can wisdom and moral corruption be one? And that's exactly Jung's point, or rather, the unconscious's point. Because Jung understood, as he worked through the vision afterward, that Elijah and Salome aren't two separate characters. They are two halves of a single truth. The path of pure spiritual knowledge, rigorous, disciplined, divorced from desire, and the path of earthly hunger, embodied, instinctual, alive to pleasure and darkness, are not opposites that cancel each other out. They are a duality, mutually dependent. You cannot have one without the shadow of the other. As Jung later wrote, "The way of life writhes like the serpent from right to left and from left to right, from thinking to pleasure and from pleasure to thinking." The prophet needs the dancer. The dancer needs the prophet. This is the serpent that connects them. There's a moment in the red crystal vision that Jung almost slips past without pausing on. As he stands before the dark hole in the cave, listening to the sound of underground water, he asks himself a question almost in passing. An oracle? Is this the place of Pythia? Pythia, the oracle of Delphi. For centuries in ancient Greece, if you needed wisdom, if you were a general deciding whether to go to war, a king unsure of his heir, an ordinary person lost at a crossroads of life, you traveled to the temple of Apollo at Delphi, on the slopes of Mount Parnassus. There, in a cavern built around a natural chasm in the earth, sat Pythia, the high priestess, the oracle. She entered a trance state. Vapors rose from the chasm. She chewed laurel leaves. She became a vessel. For what exactly no one could say with certainty. The gods, said the Greeks. The unconscious might say Jung, something from deeper than ordinary waking consciousness. And she spoke. Rulers changed their plans based on her words. Armies changed course. Civilizations turned on her prophecies. When Jung uses her name in that passing question, is this the place of Pythia? He is recognizing something vast. He is realizing that what he is doing in his study in Switzerland in 1913 is not new. Humans have always done this, in every culture, in every era. We have always found ways to descend, into caves, into trance, into dream, into the darkness beneath ordinary awareness, and ask the deeper layers of the mind what they know. Jung wasn't inventing something. He was reviving something ancient, bringing the dead back to life, taking a practice that modernity had dismissed as superstition and demonstrating from the inside that it was real and that it worked. So what is the Red Book finally? It is not a self-help book. It is not a clinical manual. It is not a religious text, though it has the spirit of one. It is a record of one man's deliberate decision to stop running from his own darkness and to go find out what lived there. What Jung discovered in those visions, over those years of descent, became the foundation of everything he would go on to teach the world. The shadow, the anima and animus, the collective unconscious, active imagination, the integration of opposites, the idea that the psyche has a drive not just toward survival, but toward wholeness, and that wholeness requires going down before you can go up. The archetypes weren't abstract theories he worked out at a desk. He met them. He argued with them. He was seduced and terrified and transformed by them. The Red Book is the raw evidence, unfiltered, unpolished, utterly honest, of that encounter. And here is the thing that makes it so relevant to anyone alive right now. You have a red book too. Maybe you haven't written it in calligraphy on parchment. Maybe the visions haven't come in quite so vivid or dramatic a form, but the material is there. The dreams you dismiss when you wake up. The emotions that surface in ways you don't understand. The patterns you keep repeating without knowing why. The figures that appear in your imagination, in your fantasies, in the people you're irrationally drawn to or irrationally repelled by. Your unconscious is always speaking. The question Jung asked himself and spent 17 years answering was simply, am I willing to listen? The red book sat in a vault for nearly 100 years. Jung kept it locked away, not because he was ashamed of it. Not really. He kept it locked away because he understood that most people weren't ready for it. That a world that had decided the inner life was irrelevant, that modernity had outgrown myth and symbol and the language of the soul, would look at it and see only madness. But read today, it doesn't read like madness. It reads like someone who went further inside than almost anyone ever has, and came back with something true. He wrote near the end of the visions, "The years of which I have spoken to you were my most important years. Everything else I did afterward was already contained in them, already begun in them. The red book isn't a relic. It isn't a curiosity. It is a map. And the territory it maps is the one you carry inside you every single day. If this video made you want to go deeper, into the red book, into your own unconscious, into the psychology of Jung, subscribe, because we're going to keep going down.